Between Two Worlds, a romantic novel. Chapter 1. Stepping into Seoul. The loud noises of Seoul's Incheon International Airport surrounded Zora Williams as she got off the plane. She felt confused by the new sights, sounds, and smells. The 27-year-old black woman from Chicago held her small bag tightly, her fingers turning white as she tried to move through the crowd of people rushing by. "Breathe, Zora," she whispered to herself, closing her eyes to calm down. "You can do this, it's just another adventure." But as she went through customs, the truth of her situation hit her. The signs in Korean looked strange to her, and the fast announcements on the loudspeaker made no sense. She struggled with her passport and work visa, feeling thankful for the English-speaking officer who quickly helped her. Stepping outside into the warm night, Zora called for a taxi, showing the driver the address of her new apartment on her phone. As they drove through the busy streets, neon lights and tall buildings blurred together in a bright show of modern life, Zora felt both excited and nervous. She had always been good at adapting, but this was different from anything she had done before. The taxi stopped at a shiny tall building in the Gangnam area. Zora paid the fare, stumbling over the strange-looking money. She dragged her suitcases into the lobby, happy that the doorman helped her with the elevator. Her apartment was small but modern and well-designed. Zora dropped her bags and fell onto the bed, feeling the tiredness from the long flight. As she started to fall asleep, her last thought was a mix of excitement and fear about what the next days would bring. The next morning, Zora woke up to her alarm beeping. She reached for her phone, feeling confused for a moment by her new surroundings. Then she remembered everything that had happened the day before, and she sat up, rubbing her eyes. "First day at the new job," she said to herself, trying to shake off the tiredness. She had gotten her dream job at a top tech company, and she was ready to make a good impression. After a quick shower, Zora stood in front of her closet, picking a clean white shirt and black pants. She wanted to look professional but not to dress up. As she put on her makeup, she wondered how people would see her in this new place. Would being a black woman make her stand out even more? Pushing away her doubts, Zora grabbed her bag and went out. The morning rush in Seoul was nothing like what she had seen in Chicago. The subway car was packed, and Zora found herself pushed against the door, trying to keep her balance as the train moved forward. She reached the shiny office building with only a minute to spare, smoothing down her hair and taking a deep breath before walking in. The receptionist greeted her in fast Korean, and Zora panicked for a second before the woman switched to English, seeing her confusion. "Ms. Williams, welcome to Technova Seoul. Please follow me." As Zora walked through the office, she noticed people looking at her curiously. She smiled and nodded, trying to look confident even though she felt nervous. The morning was a blur of introductions, training, and lots of information. By lunchtime, Zora's head was spinning. She had met her team, and they seemed friendly enough, but the language barrier was harder than she thought. Even though many of her co-workers spoke English, they switched between Korean and English quickly, leaving her feeling lost. Sitting alone in the company cafeteria, Zora picked at a dish she didn't recognize, feeling a wave of homesickness. The excitement of her new job faded a little, and the reality hit her she was alone in a foreign country, surrounded by a language and culture she didn't understand. The afternoon dragged on with more meetings and paperwork. When Zora finally left the office, it was dark outside, and the streets of Seoul were full of nighttime energy. Tired and hungry, she decided to try a restaurant near her apartment. The small place was busy with people, and the air smelled of cooking meat and spices. Zora stood in the doorway, feeling overwhelmed by the noise. A waiter came up to her, speaking fast in Korean. Zora fumbled with her phone, trying to open a translation app. English," she said, her face turning red from embarrassment. The waiter's eyes widened, and he nodded, showing her to a small table in the corner. He gave her a menu with some English translations, but they were not very clear. Zora pointed to something that looked safe, hoping it wasn't too spicy. When the food came, she looked at a hot stone pot with rice, vegetables, and what seemed to be raw egg and beef. Dolset bibimbap, the waiter said, showing her how to mix the food. Zora nodded and copied what the other diners were doing. The flavors were strong and different, but not bad. As she ate, she felt proud. She had managed her first meal in Seoul, even if it was a bit awkward. Back in her apartment, Zora took off her shoes and sat on the small couch. She thought about everything that happened that day, and she felt a lump in her throat. She picked up her phone and hesitated before calling her mom. "Hey, baby girl," her mom's warm voice filled the phone. "How was your first day?" Zora tried to keep her voice steady as she talked about her day, but she felt her voice shaking. It's so different here, Mom. I feel so out of place." Maybe this was a mistake. Now, Zora Marie Williams, her mom's voice was both firm and loving. "Listen to me. You are one of the smartest, bravest women I know. You worked hard for this job, and it's normal to feel overwhelmed at first. Give it time, you'll find your way." Zora wiped away her tears, feeling both grateful and homesick. "Thanks, Mom. I miss you." "I miss you too, baby, but I'm so proud of you. Get some rest, and tomorrow will be better." After hanging up, Zora walked to the window of her apartment, looking out at the bright lights of Seoul. The city seemed full of energy, both exciting and scary. As she looked at the unfamiliar view, she made a quiet promise to herself. She would give this adventure everything she had, no matter how hard it was. She climbed into bed and set her alarm for the next day. As she fell asleep, her mind was filled with thoughts of neon lights, strange foods, and the faces of her new co-workers. In her dreams, she walked through the streets of Seoul, lost but knowing that somewhere in this big, strange city she would find her place. The soft light of morning was just starting to come through her curtains when Zora woke up. For a moment, she lay still, looking around her new apartment in Seoul. Then she remembered the day before, and a mix of hope and worrying filled her as she thought about the day ahead. As she got ready for her second day at Technova, Zora repeated her mother's words to herself. "You'll find your way," she said, fixing her shirt in the mirror. With a deep breath and a determined look, she stepped out to face another day in her new home, ready to handle the challenges and chances that waited for her in the busy heart of Seoul. Chapter 2. The Language Exchange. Zora held her phone tightly, looking closely at the map as she walked through the confusing streets of Seoul. She was trying to find the community center where the language exchange event was happening, but it seemed hidden among small streets and tall buildings. After turning one more corner, she finally saw a building with a sign in both Korean and English. Finally, she whispered, feeling relieved and walking faster. The past week at Technova had been busy with new faces, strange work routines, and cultural differences that made her feel out of place. She was starting to feel lonely, and the idea of meeting others in a similar situation sounded too good to miss. When Zora opened the door to the community center, she was greeted by the sound of people speaking both Korean and English. The room was full of people from different countries and ages, all talking happily. Zora stood at the entrance for a moment, feeling a little nervous. "Welcome," a friendly voice broke through her thoughts. A young Korean woman with a warm smile came up to her. "Is this your first time here?" Zora nodded, feeling a little more relaxed. "Yes, I just moved to Seoul last week for work." "Great. I'm Soo-yeon, one of the organizers. Let me explain how it works." As Soo-yeon explained that everyone could switch between speaking Korean and English, Zora looked around the room. That's when she saw him. In a quiet corner, a man was sitting alone. He looked about 30, with a gentle face and wire-rimmed glasses. He seemed calm, very different from the rest of the lively room. Zora found him interesting. Soo-yeon noticed her staring. "Ah, that's Min-joon. He's one of our Korean teachers, but he's very shy. Maybe you can talk to him. He's great at teaching beginners." With a little push from Soo-yeon, Zora walked across the room toward him. As she got closer, Min-joon looked up, surprised. "Annyeonghaseyo," Zora said, hoping she had said the Korean greeting correctly. A small smile appeared on Min-joon's face. "Hello," he replied in English, his voice soft. "Are you new here?" Zora nodded and sat next to him. "I'm Zora. I just moved here from Chicago." "Ah. Welcome to Seoul," Min-joon said carefully. "I'm Min-joon. I teach Korean language and culture." As they talked, Zora felt comfortable with Min-joon. Speaking with him was like finding a calm place in a busy world. "So, why did you move to Seoul?" Min-joon asked, becoming more curious. Zora explained about her job at Technova and how she was excited but also struggling with the changes. Min-joon listened carefully, nodding. "It must be hard," he said thoughtfully. "Even for those of us who live here, Seoul can be overwhelming." "Exactly," Zora laughed. "I feel like I'm always behind, especially with the language. I've been trying to learn some basic words, but it's tough." Min-joon's eyes brightened. "Maybe I can help. We can exchange lessons. You help me with English, and I'll teach you Korean." Zora felt excited. "Really? That would be great, but are you sure?" "I don't want to be a bother." "Not at all," Min-joon said, showing more interest. "I'm curious about American culture. It would be a fair exchange." As they continued to chat, switching between simple Korean lessons and talking about their cultures, Zora felt at ease. Min-joon was patient, teaching her phrases and answering questions about Korea while also asking about life in Chicago. "I've always wanted to know," Min-joon said, looking a little shy, "is deep dish pizza really as good as people say?" Zora laughed, her voice echoing across the room. "It's even better. When I figure out how to cook in my tiny apartment, I'll have to make some for you." As the evening ended, they exchanged contact information and planned to meet again for their first official language exchange session later that week. Zora felt a little sad to leave. "Gomapsumnida," she said, using one of the Korean phrases Min-joon had taught her. "Thank you for today. It really helped." Min-joon smiled warmly. "It was my pleasure, Zora. I look forward to our next meeting." As Zora walked home through the busy streets, she felt lighter. The city that had seemed so strange earlier now felt a bit more familiar. She was already looking forward to learning more about Seoul, thanks to what Min-joon had taught her. Back in her apartment, Zora checked her phone and saw a text from her mom. "How was your day, sweetheart?" "Any better?" Zora smiled as she replied. "Much better, Mom. I think I made a friend." The next morning, as Zora got ready for work, she hummed a tune. The idea of meeting Min-joon for their language exchange gave her new energy. She even greeted her neighbors in Korean as she left her apartment, and they smiled in surprise. At Technova, Zora approached her work with new enthusiasm. During a team meeting, when the conversation switched between English and Korean, she understood a few words she had learned from Min-joon. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Her co-worker, Jisoo, noticed, "You seem different today, Zora," she said during lunch. More relaxed, Zora nodded, taking a bite of her bibimbap. "I went to a language exchange last night. I met someone who's going to help me with Korean." Jisoo's eyes lit up. "That's great. It'll make your time here much easier, and who knows," she added with a wink, "maybe you'll get more than just language lessons." Zora blushed slightly but laughed it off. "Right now, I'd be happy to order coffee without pointing at the menu." As the week went on, Zora looked forward to her first lesson with Min-joon. They agreed to meet at a quiet cafe near the Han River, a place Min-joon recommended for its calm atmosphere. When Saturday came, Zora spent extra time choosing her outfit. She settled on dark jeans, a soft blue blouse, and comfortable shoes. As she walked to the cafe, she practiced the Korean words she had learned, hoping to impress Min-joon. The cafe was lovely, with big windows looking out at the river. Zora saw Min-joon sitting at a table with textbooks and notes. When he saw her, his serious expression softened into a smile. "Annyeonghaseyo, Min-joon si," Zora said proudly. Min-joon smiled wider. "Your pronunciation is already better." They started the lesson, and Zora was impressed by Min-joon's teaching. He explained Korean grammar clearly, and he seemed excited when talking about Korean culture. In Korean, Min-joon explained, "The way you speak depends on the person's age and your relationship with them. Showing respect is very important." Zora nodded, writing down notes. "It's so different from English. We're much more casual." Min-joon was curious. "Is it true that in America, students call their teachers by their first names?" Zora laughed. "Sometimes, yes, it depends on the school. I guess that doesn't happen here." Min-joon looked surprised. "Never. It would be very rude." As they continued their lesson, they also talked about their different cultures. Zora told stories about Chicago, and Min-joon explained Korean customs. "When someone offers you a drink," Min-joon said, "holding an imaginary cup, you should accept it with both hands to show respect." Zora copied the gesture. "Is that why my boss looked so surprised when I took coffee from her with one hand?" Min-joon laughed. "Probably, but don't worry, people understand that foreigners might not know all the customs." When their lesson ended, neither of them seemed ready to leave. They ordered more drinks and kept talking. "So, Min-joon," Zora asked, stirring her iced coffee, "why did you become a language teacher?" Min-joon looked out the window at the river. "I've always been interested in languages and how they help us understand the world. Teaching lets me share that interest." He paused, looking a little sad, "and it helps me feel connected to the world outside my family's expectations." Zora tilted her head, curious. "What do you mean?" Min-joon blushed a little. "My family has very traditional ideas. Teaching, especially to foreigners, is my way of exploring beyond those limits." Zora felt touched by his honesty. She gently squeezed his hand. "I understand. Sometimes you have to find your own way." They shared a quiet moment, looking at each other before Min-joon's phone rang. He checked it, frowning slightly. "Sorry, it's my mom. I should go." As they packed up, Zora felt a little sad. The lesson was over. "This was great, Min-joon." "Same time next week," Min-joon smiled. "I'd like that, and maybe I could show you some of my favorite places in Seoul." Zora beamed. "I'd love that." As they left the cafe, Zora watched Min-joon walk away, feeling excited about seeing him again. She walked along the Han River with the tall buildings of Seoul in the distance. For the first time since she arrived, the city didn't feel as strange. Zora took a deep breath, enjoying the cool air and the feeling of new possibilities. She had come to Seoul looking for adventure and to grow, and she felt that with Min-joon she might find both. As she walked back to her apartment, she thought about the Korean phrases and the time they spent laughing together. For the first time, Zora started to feel like she belonged in her new home. Chapter 3: First Lessons and City Lights. The soft sound of a bell rang as Zora entered the small language school where Min-joon taught. She stopped at the door, taking in the warm feel of the room with its old wooden desks and walls covered with colorful Korean alphabet charts. Min-joon looked up from his desk, smiling warmly when he saw her. "Annyeonghaseyo, Zora-si," he greeted, his voice showing a bit more excitement than usual. "Annyeonghaseyo, Min-joon si," Zora answered, feeling proud that the Korean greeting was now easier to say. She sat at a desk near the front of the room, ready with her notebook and pens. As Min-joon started the lesson, Zora found herself fascinated by the way he taught. His quiet love for the Korean language was clear as he explained the sentence structure and honorifics. Time seemed to pass quickly as they went through basic phrases and cultural manners. In Korean, Min-joon explained, writing on the whiteboard, we often leave out the subject of a sentence if it's clear from the situation. It's different from English. Zora nodded, writing notes quickly. It's interesting how the language reflects the culture, she said. The focus on the situation and social rank. Min-joon's eyes brightened at her comment. Exactly. language and culture go hand in hand. Knowing one helps you understand the other. By the end of the lesson, Zora felt a mix of pride and excitement. She had learned more in those few hours than she had in weeks of struggling through language apps by herself. "You're doing really well, Zora," Min-joon said as they packed their things. After a brief pause, he added, "I was thinking, would you like to practice some of what you learned? Maybe over dinner." Zora felt a flutter of excitement. "That sounds great. Do you have a place in mind?" Min-joon nodded, smiling shyly. "There's a spot in Myeongdong I think you'll like. They have really good street food, and it's a fun area to explore." As they walked through the busy streets of Myeongdong, Zora was amazed by all the sounds and smells around her. The air was filled with the scent of cooking meat and sweet treats, neon signs flashed above, and the noise of shoppers and sellers filled the streets. Min-joon gently guided her through the crowd, pointing out different food stalls and explaining what they offered. Zora's eyes widened at the many strange and exciting dishes. "What's that?" she asked, pointing to a seller who was stretching a long piece of dough. "Ah, that's kultere," Min-joon explained. "It's a traditional Korean candy. The name means honey skein because of how it's made. Want to try some?" Zora nodded eagerly, and Min-joon talked to the seller in fast Korean. He came back with 2 small boxes, handing one to Zora. When she took a bite of the light, honey-flavored dough filled with nuts, Zora let out a soft sound of happiness. "Oh my God, this is so good!" Min-joon laughed, his eyes crinkling with joy at her reaction. "I'm glad you like it. There's more to try, shall we?" They spent the next hour walking through the streets, trying foods like hotteok pancakes stuffed with brown sugar and nuts and spicy tteokbokki rice cakes. With each new dish, Min-joon patiently taught Zora the Korean names and encouraged her to order using the words she had just learned. Sitting on a bench, eating fish-shaped bunjeopang pastries filled with sweet red bean paste, Zora turned to Min-joon. "Thank you for this. I've been here for weeks, but I feel like I'm really seeing Seoul for the first time tonight." Min-joon lowered his head, a small blush on his cheeks. "I'm happy I could show you this part of the city. There's so much more to explore." As the night continued, they were drawn to the shining lights of Namsan Tower in the distance. "Want to go up?" Min-joon asked, pointing at the famous tower. "The view of the city is amazing at night." Zora nodded excitedly, and they went to the cable car station. As they rode up, the city of Seoul spread out below them, a blanket of twinkling lights and tall buildings. At the top, Zora gasped at the view. The city seemed to stretch forever, with the Han River winding darkly through the middle. Min-joon stood next to her, his presence comforting in the cool night air. "It's beautiful," Zora whispered, her eyes locked on the scene. "Yes, it is," Min-joon answered softly, and when Zora looked at him, she saw he was watching her, not the city. Their eyes met, and for a moment, everything else seemed to disappear. The moment was broken by a group of tourists walking past them, and Zora felt herself blush. She quickly turned back to the view, her mind racing with thoughts of what that shared look could mean. As they came back down the tower, a comfortable silence settled between them. The cool air carried the smell of street food and the energy of the city. Zora found herself walking closer to Min-joon, their hands sometimes brushing as they moved through the crowds. "I should probably head home," Zora said reluctantly when they reached the subway station. "I have an early meeting tomorrow." Min-joon nodded, a hint of sadness on his face. "Of course. Thank you for tonight, Zora. I hope it helped with your Korean practice." Zora smiled warmly. It was more than helpful. It was ... perfect. As they said goodbye, Zora felt a mix of happiness and longing. The evening had been more than just a lesson. It had been a new experience of Seoul, shared with someone who was becoming more than just her teacher. On the subway ride home, Zora thought about the night. The taste of the street food still lingered, the city lights danced in her mind, and the warmth of Min-joon's presence stayed with her like a soft embrace. When she arrived home, Zora's phone buzzed with a message. It was from Min-joon. I hope you had fun tonight, sleep well, and don't forget to practice your honorifics before the next lesson. Have sweet dreams. Zora felt a warm glow as she read the message. She replied, carefully forming the words in Korean. Thank you, Min-joon. I had a really good time. Looking forward to our next lesson. As she got ready for bed, Zora found herself humming a Korean pop song she had heard in Myeongdong. The city, which had once felt so strange, now seemed full of warmth and excitement. She drifted off to sleep with a smile, dreaming of city lights and Min-joon's laughter. Chapter 4. Cultural Clashes. Zora walked confidently into the Technova office, feeling boosted by her progress in Korean and the growing friendship with Min-joon. The usual morning activity filled the open workspace as she headed to her desk, nodding greetings to her colleagues. Zora, a voice called out, and she turned to see her team leader, Mrs. Kim, waving her over. We have an important client meeting this afternoon. I'd like you to join us. Excitement rose in Zora's chest. This was the chance she'd been waiting for, an opportunity to show her skills and prove her worth to the company. Of course, Mrs. Kim, I'd be happy to attend. As she settled at her desk, Zora's mind raced with ideas. She'd been working on a creative project she was sure would impress the clients. This could be her moment to stand out. Time passed quickly, and soon it was time for the meeting. Zora gathered her notes and followed Mrs. Kim and the team into a sleek conference room. The clients, executives from a major Korean company, were already seated, their faces serious. Mrs. Kim began the introductions in Korean, and Zora listened closely, understanding more than she would have a few weeks ago. When it was her turn, she stood and bowed slightly, remembering Min-joon's lessons on good manners. Hello. My name is Zora Williams. Nice to meet you. The clients looked a bit surprised, then gave approving nods. Feeling encouraged, Zora started her presentation, her excitement clear as she explained her ideas for the project. But as she spoke, she noticed a change in the room's atmosphere. The clients' expressions became more serious, and they began whispering to each other. Mrs. Kim frowned and gave Zora a warning glance. Confused but determined, Zora kept going, though her voice wavered slightly. When she finished, there was an uncomfortable silence. Mrs. Kim quickly took over, speaking fast in Korean. Zora heard words like new employee and I'm sorry, and her heart sank. As the meeting ended, the clients left with short nods, their faces unreadable. Mrs. Kim turned to Zora, a mix of frustration and sympathy on her face. Zora, we need to talk, she said, leaving no room for debate. In Mrs. Kim's office, Zora sat stiffly, her earlier confidence gone. Mrs. Kim sighed, rubbing her forehead before speaking. Zora, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but you made several cultural mistakes in that meeting, she said. In Korean business culture, it's very important to show respect to people in higher positions and with more experience. Your presentation, though impressive, seemed too direct and disrespectful to the senior people there. Zora felt her face grow hot with embarrassment. I didn't know. I was just trying to show what we can do. Mrs. Kim nodded. I understand, but in Korea, it's not just about the ideas. It's about how you present them. Respecting hierarchy and keeping harmony are very important, especially in business. As Mrs. Kim explained more about the things Zora had missed, using polite language, showing respect through body language, and letting senior members take the lead, Zora felt disappointment flood her. She had thought she was improving, but this showed how much she still needed to learn. I'm sorry, Mrs. Kim. I'll do better next time, Zora said softly. Mrs. Kim's face softened. It's a learning process, Zora. You're adjusting to a new culture, and it takes time. Just be more aware of these things in the future, okay? Zora nodded, thankful for Mrs. Kim's understanding, though she still felt embarrassed. As she left the office, she noticed the curious looks from her co-workers and quiet whispers followed her. The rest of the day passed in a blur, with Zora replaying the meeting over and over in her mind, going over each mistake. By the time she left the office, the sky was dark and a light rain fell, matching her mood. Without thinking, she found herself heading to the familiar language school where Min-joon taught. The lights were still on, and through the window she could see him tidying up after his last class. Zora hesitated at the door, unsure of herself. But before she could leave, Min-joon looked up and saw her. His face lit up with a warm smile, and he waved her in. Zora, he greeted her as she entered, but his smile faded when he noticed her sad expression. "Are you okay?" The concern in his voice made Zora's emotions bubble over, and before she knew it, she was telling him everything: the meeting, her mistakes, the embarrassment she felt. Min-joon listened carefully, his face showing sympathy. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, tapping his fingers on the desk thoughtfully. "That sounds like a tough experience," he said finally. "But Zora, misunderstandings like this are a natural part of adapting to a new culture." "I thought I was doing so well," Zora sighed, sinking into one of the student desks. "Now it feels like I'm back at square one." Min-joon shook his head gently, a small smile on his face. "Not at all. The fact that you know what went wrong and want to improve shows how much progress you've made. Many people would just get frustrated and give up." His words were comforting, but Zora still felt the sting of failure. "I just wish I could understand all the unwritten rules. It feels like there's so much going on that I can't see." Min-joon nodded thoughtfully. Korean culture, especially in business, is very subtle. It's not just about the language, but understanding the whole social setting. He paused, then added, "Maybe we could include more cultural lessons in our sessions." Zora looked up, a bit of hope in her eyes. "You do that?" "Of course," Min-joon smiled. "That's what friends are for, right?" The word friends gave Zora a warm feeling, briefly lifting her sadness. Despite the day's setbacks, she realized she had found something precious in Seoul, a true friend who understood her struggles. "Now," Min-joon said, standing up and grabbing his coat, "I think we both need a break." "Have you tried soju?" Zora shook her head and Min-joon's eyes sparkled. "Then let me introduce you to another part of Korean culture: after-work drinks with colleagues." They stepped out into the light rain, and Min-joon led her to a small, cozy poyeongmatcha, a street food tent tucked away in a quiet alley. The smell of grilled meat and the soft glow of paper lanterns created a welcoming atmosphere. They sat down on low stools, and Min-joon ordered for them in fast Korean. Soon, the table was covered with small dishes: bendaeryok mung bean pancakes, tteokbokki spicy rice cakes, and various side dishes. Min-joon poured them each a small glass of clear liquid, soju, he explained. "It's traditional to pour for others, never for yourself. And when drinking with someone older, you should turn your head slightly away to show respect." Zora nodded, making a mental note. As they clinked glasses and took their first sip, the strong drink warmed her from the inside. As they ate, Min-joon explained more about Korean business culture. "In Korea, nunchi is very important," he said. "It's about understanding the unspoken rules and the mood of a situation." Zora leaned in, interested. "How do you learn to do that?" "It takes time and careful observation," Min-joon said. "Watch how others behave, notice their body language and tone. In meetings, for example, the most senior person usually speaks first and others follow their lead." As the night went on, Zora began to relax, her earlier embarrassment fading. Min-joon's explanations helped her see her mistakes in a new light, not as failures but as lessons. "You know," Zora said, pouring another glass of soju for Min-joon using both hands as she'd learned, "I think I get why you became a language teacher. It's not just about words, is it? It's about connecting cultures." Min-joon's eyes softened and a small blush touched his cheeks. "That's exactly it. Language opens the door to understanding a culture, but there's so much more beneath the surface." After they finished eating, they stepped back out into the night. Zora felt a new sense of purpose. The city lights twinkled through the now clearing sky, and Seoul no longer felt like an impossible challenge, but like a puzzle waiting to be solved. "Thank you," Min-joon, she said quietly as they walked toward the subway station. For listening and for helping me see things more clearly. Min-joon smiled, his hand briefly brushing hers. That's what friends are for, right? And I'm learning from you, too. Your perspective helps me see my own culture differently. As they said goodbye at the station, Zora felt a slight reluctance to part. There was something about Min-joon's quiet strength that made her feel more grounded in this unfamiliar city. Same time next week for our lesson, she asked, trying not to sound too eager. Min-joon nodded, his eyes crinkling in a smile. I'm looking forward to it. And Zora, he added as she turned to leave, don't be too hard on yourself. Every mistake is a chance to grow. On the subway ride home, Zora replayed the day in her mind. What had felt like a disaster earlier now seemed like a turning point. She had a better idea of what she needed to learn, and most importantly, she had someone to help her navigate Korean culture. When she got home, Zora caught her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at her wasn't the overwhelmed newcomer from a few weeks ago. There was a new strength in her eyes, a look of determination. She grabbed her Korean language books and sat on her small balcony. As she studied, the sounds of the city below floated up, car horns, people talking, the distant rumble of the subway. But instead of feeling strange, these sounds now felt like a symphony she was starting to understand. Zora's phone buzzed with a message from Min-joon. Keep going tomorrow. You're doing well. A warm smile spread across Zora's face as she typed back. Thank you, Min-joon. Thanks to you, Seoul is starting to feel more like home. As she drifted off to sleep that night, Zora's dreams were filled with the lively streets of Seoul, the taste of soju, and the kind encouragement in Min-joon's eyes. The challenges of adapting to this new culture no longer seemed overwhelming. Instead, they felt like part of an exciting journey, one she was eager to embrace, with Min-joon by her side. Chapter 5: Blossoming Feelings. A gentle spring wind carried the sweet smell of cherry blossoms as Zora and Min-joon walked through the grounds of Gyeongbokgung Palace. The old buildings stood next to the tall, modern ones in Seoul, showing how the past and present came together. It's beautiful, Zora said, her eyes wide as she looked at the detailed design of the palace. I can't believe I've been in Seoul for months and I'm only just seeing this now. Min-joon smiled, a proud look in his eyes. Gyeongbokgung is the heart of Seoul's history. It's where our past and present meet. As they walked, their hands touched lightly, sending a small thrill through Zora. She became very aware of Min-joon's presence beside her, the warmth from his body in the cool air. Their language lessons had grown more frequent over the past few weeks, turning into trips where Zora felt more connected to Seoul with every day. Today's visit to the palace was meant to practice words related to Korean history, but Zora couldn't help feeling that something more was happening between them. As they stopped to admire a cherry blossom tree, Min-joon turned to her, his face suddenly serious. Zora, there's something I want to ask you. Zora's heart beat faster. Yes. Min-joon paused, a slight blush on his cheeks. I was wondering if you'd like to join me for a traditional tea ceremony next week. It's something special I'd like to share with you. The look in his eyes made Zora's breath stop for a second. I'd love to, Min-joon. His face lit up with a big smile, and Zora felt like the sun had just come out from behind a cloud. As they continued walking, their hands touched again, and this time neither pulled away. The warmth of Min-joon's hand felt right, like everything was falling into place. The week before the tea ceremony passed quickly for Zora. At work, she found herself daydreaming about Min-joon's smile, the sound of his voice as he taught her about Korean culture, and the way he laughed when she tried to say hard words. Her better understanding of Korean customs was noticed at work. During a meeting, when a senior executive joined unexpectedly, Zora remembered to stand and bow slightly, using the right words as she greeted him. Mrs. Kim's approving nod made her feel proud. You've come a long way, Zora, Mrs. Kim said after the meeting. Your efforts to understand our culture are appreciated. Zora smiled, thinking of how much Min-joon had taught her. Thank you, Mrs. Kim. I have a good teacher. The day of the tea ceremony arrived, and Zora found herself standing outside a traditional Korean house in the Bukhanhonic village. The neighborhood of old-style Korean houses was like stepping back in time, completely different from the tall buildings in Gangnam. Min-joon was waiting for her, dressed in a simple but beautiful hanbok. The traditional clothing made him look even more graceful. Zora suddenly felt underdressed in her modern clothes. As if he could read her thoughts, Min-joon smiled kindly. You look beautiful, Zora-see. Are you ready to experience a piece of Korean history? Inside the house, they were greeted by an elderly tea master. The room was simple, with low tables and cushions on the floor. The smell of incense filled the air, creating a calm feeling. As they knelt at the low table, Min-joon leaned close to explain in a soft voice, the tea ceremony isn't just about drinking tea. It's a way to find peace and connect with the world around us. Zora nodded, watching carefully as the tea master began the careful process of making the tea. Every move was slow and graceful, from heating the water to measuring the tea leaves. When the first cup was poured, Min-joon helped Zora understand the right way to drink. Hold the cup with your right hand and support it with your left, he said softly. Take 3 sips and enjoy each one. As Zora lifted the small porcelain cup to her lips, she saw Min-joon looking at her over the rim. His gaze made her blush, and she quickly looked down, focusing on the tea. The ceremony went on in peaceful silence, broken only by the soft sound of fabric and the gentle clink of cups. Zora found herself relaxing, her usual busy energy calmed by the quiet and stillness around her. After they finished the last cup of tea, the tea master spoke quietly in Korean. Min-joon translated, she says, that balance comes from respecting traditions while also accepting new things. It's like finding the right balance in a cup of tea. Outside, as they walked through the small streets of Bukhan, Zora felt closer to Seoul, to Korean culture, and to Min-joon. The sun was setting and the sky turned pink and gold, making the traditional houses look even more beautiful. Thank you for sharing this with me, Zora said quietly. I feel like I understand so much more now, not just about tea, but about the importance of traditions in Korean culture. Min-joon smiled, his hand gently holding hers as they walked. I'm glad. There's so much more I want to show you, Zora-see. So much more I want to share. They stopped at a spot where they could see the whole city. The tall buildings of Seoul shone with lights as the night came. But here, in this quiet, old part of the city, everything felt calm. Min-joon turned to Zora, his face soft but serious. Zora-see, I've been wanting to say something. Zora's heart started to race, her hand still holding Min-joon's. Yes. These last few months teaching you about Korea, showing you around the city. It's been more than just language lessons for me. I care about you, a lot. Zora felt a wave of happiness and nerves at the same time. Min-joon-see, I feel the same way. You've become really important to me. Min-joon's face brightened with a smile that was even more dazzling than the city lights. Slowly, giving her time to say no if she wanted, he leaned in. Their lips met in a soft, gentle kiss that made Zora's heart race. When they pulled apart, Zora felt like she was seeing Seoul and Min-joon in a new way. The city that once seemed strange now felt full of hope and warmth. So, Min-joon said with a playful smile, shall we keep working on your Korean lessons? I think saranghae might be a good word to learn next. Zora laughed, recognizing the Korean word for I love you. I think I'd like that very much, she said, pulling him in for another kiss. As they made their way to the restaurant, Zora felt amazed at how comfortable she had become walking through the busy streets of Seoul. The signs in Korean no longer seemed confusing, and she could catch small bits of conversations around her. At the restaurant, a small, cozy place full of locals, Min-joon ordered for them in fast Korean. As they waited for their food, Zora found herself amazed by the man in front of her. Min-joon's quiet strength, his patience, and his deep love for his culture, all of these things had made her fall for him. "What are you thinking?" Min-joon asked, noticing her thoughtful look. Zora smiled and reached across the table to hold his hand. "I'm thinking about how thankful I am to have met you. You've shown me a whole new world, Min-joon. Not just Korea, but a world where I feel like I belong." Min-joon squeezed her hand, his eyes full of emotion. "And you, Zora, have shown me my own culture through fresh eyes. You've reminded me of the beauty in things I had started to forget." As they enjoyed their meal, the conversation flowed easily between them, a mix of Korean and English with lots of laughter and loving looks. Zora felt as though she was floating, lifted by the warmth of love and the joy of learning new things. Later, as Min-joon walked her to her apartment, the streets of Seoul seemed to glow with excitement. The neon signs and tall buildings that had once seemed so scary now felt like friendly faces, each with its own story to tell. At her door, they paused, neither of them wanting the night to end. "Yo, Zora, Min-joon said softly, using the Korean phrase for sleep well. "Yo, Min-joon, Zora replied carefully. Then, gathering her courage, she added, "Sering hey." Min-joon's face lit up with joy. "Nato sering hey," he replied, pulling her in for one last, gentle kiss. As Zora walked into her apartment, her heart full and her mind buzzing with the events of the day, she felt like she had crossed an invisible line. Seoul was no longer just a place she was visiting for work. It had become a home, a place where she found not only growth in her career but also love and happiness. She placed the book of poetry Min-joon had given her on her bedside table, the pressed cherry blossom marking a special page. As she drifted off to sleep, her dreams were filled with the sound of Korean poems, the warmth of Min-joon's smile, and the promise of more adventures to come in the city she now called home. Chapter 6: Meeting the Family. The late afternoon sun made long shadows on the busy streets of Gangnam as Zora smoothed her dress. She stood outside Min-joon's family home, a modern apartment building that somehow felt traditional. Her heart was beating fast with a mix of excitement and nervousness. This wasn't just another cultural experience or language lesson. Min-joon was inviting her into his world, to meet the people who had shaped him. "Ready?" Min-joon asked, giving her hand a comforting squeeze. His usual calmness had a bit of nervousness, which made Zora feel better. At least she wasn't the only one feeling anxious. "As ready as I'll ever be," Zora replied, taking a deep breath. "Please take care of me," she added in Korean, earning a proud smile from Min-joon. When they entered the apartment, Zora was greeted by the rich smell of home-cooked Korean food. The hallway was lined with neatly arranged shoes, and she carefully removed her own, placing them beside Min-joon's. Min-joon's mother came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. Her face showed polite interest, but Zora noticed her eyes widen just a little when she saw her. "Mother, this is Zora, whom I told you about," Min-joon said with a proud note in his voice. Zora bowed deeply, remembering Min-joon's lessons on how to act properly. "Hello, Mother. It's nice to meet you. I'm Zora," she said, making sure to speak clearly. Min-joon's mother's face softened a little at Zora's effort. "Welcome to our home," she said in accented English. "Please come in." As they moved into the living room, Zora noticed the mix of modern furniture and traditional Korean items. A smooth leather couch sat below a large, fancy calligraphy scroll. On a side table, a delicate vase held a perfectly arranged set of flowers. Min-joon's father came out from another room, standing straight with a watchful gaze that fell on Zora. She bowed again and introduced herself, just as she had practiced. His nod was short, but it wasn't unkind. As they gathered around the low dining table, Zora could feel the unspoken expectations in the air. She was very aware that she was an outsider, not just in culture, but in this close family circle. The table was covered with all kinds of food that made Zora's mouth water. Fragrant kimchi, sizzling bulgogi, and many small side dishes filled every space. In the middle was a large stone pot of bubbling doenjang jjigae, its strong smell filling the room. "I hope you like Korean food," Min-joon's mother said as she started serving rice into small bowls. "Yes, I really like it," Zora replied with excitement. "Min-joon has shown me many delicious dishes." There was a flicker of surprise on his parents' faces at her use of Korean, and Zora felt a small boost of confidence. Maybe this wouldn't be so difficult after all. As they began to eat, the conversation was a mix of Korean and English. Min-joon's father asked about her job at Technova, clearly interested because the company was well known. Zora explained her role, being careful not to brag too much about her achievements, just as Min-joon had taught her was polite. "It must be very different from America," Min-joon's mother commented, her voice calm but her eyes studying Zora closely. Zora nodded, choosing her words carefully. "It is different, but in many wonderful ways. I'm learning so much about Korean culture and business. It's been a great experience." As the meal continued, Zora found herself relaxing a little. The food was delicious, and Min-joon's supportive glances helped calm her nerves. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being carefully watched. Then the topic shifted to Min-joon's work as a language teacher. His father's eyebrows drew together slightly. "Min-joon, when will you find a more stable job?" he asked, with a note of disappointment in his voice. Zora felt Min-joon tense beside her. She didn't understand every word, but she understood enough. This was clearly a familiar argument between them. "Father, my job is stable, and I really love what I do," Min-joon replied, his voice calm but with a hint of frustration. Feeling the tension, Zora took a chance. "If I may," she said politely in Korean, "Min-joon is a wonderful teacher. He's taught me so much, not just about the language, but about Korean culture and traditions. It's an important job." The room went quiet, and Zora worried she had said too much. But then Min-joon's mother spoke. "Your Korean is very good," she said with approval. Min-joon must be a good teacher. The tension eased a bit, and Zora saw Min-joon smile at her gratefully. As the meal ended, his mother brought out a plate of fresh fruit for dessert. Zora admired the way it was presented, another part of Korean culture she had learned to appreciate. As the evening came to an end, Zora felt both relieved and unsure. She had made it through dinner without any major mistakes, but she still felt like Min-joon's parents were holding back their judgment. In the entryway, as they prepared to leave, Min-joon's mother handed Zora a container. "Some leftover kimchi," she explained, "homemade." Zora was touched by the gesture, understanding it as a small sign of acceptance. "Thank you, Mother," she said, bowing deeply. Outside, in the cool night air, Zora let out a long breath. Min-joon pulled her into a warm hug. "You were amazing," he whispered. "Thank you for doing this." As they walked hand in hand through the now familiar streets of Seoul, Zora thought about the evening. It hadn't been perfect, but it was a start. She had taken her first steps into Min-joon's family world, learning the challenges of Korean family life. They paused at a small park and sat on a bench under the light of a street lamp. The distant hum of the city created a calm background for their conversation. "I'm sorry about my father," Min-joon said, sounding sad. "He has very traditional ideas about jobs and success." Zora squeezed his hand. "It's okay. Every family has its own problems. I'm just glad I got to meet them." Min-joon turned to her, his eyes serious. "Zora, I want you to know. No matter what my parents think, you're important to me. What we have is special." Zora felt warmth spread through her. "It's special to me too, Min-joon. We'll figure this out together, okay?" As they shared a sweet kiss under the Seoul night sky, Zora felt more determined than ever. The road ahead might not be easy, but with Min-joon by her side, she was ready to face anything. Later that night, as Zora got ready for bed in her apartment, she saw a text from Min-joon. My mother said you were polite and your Korean was good. Thank you so much, Zora. Zora smiled and typed her reply. I'm glad. It was an honor to meet your parents. We'll overcome this together. As she drifted off to sleep, Zora's dreams were filled with images of family dinners, the smell of homemade kimchi, and the warmth of Min-joon's smile. The challenges of their relationship were real, but so was the love growing between them. In Seoul, Zora had found not just a home, but a future full of hope. Chapter 7. Professional Pressures. The tall, shiny Technova building stood in front of Zora as she walked quickly through the busy streets of Gangnam. The morning sun reflected off the windows, hinting at another hot summer day in Seoul. As she scanned her card and stepped into the cool, air-conditioned lobby, Zora felt like something was different today. Her feeling was right when she got to her desk and saw an urgent email from HR. With a mix of excitement and nervousness, she opened it. Dear Zora Williams, we are excited to tell you that you've been shortlisted for a big promotion. This role would require you to move back to our headquarters in Chicago. Zora's heart started racing as she read the details. The job was everything she had dreamed of, a senior role leading a team on exciting projects. It was the kind of opportunity that could define her career. But as she read on, her stomach twisted, moving back to Chicago. Just when Seoul was starting to feel like home. Everything okay? Jisoo's voice snapped her back to the moment. Her co-worker looked at her with concern. Zora forced a smile. Yeah, just big news. I've been offered a promotion. Jisoo's face lit up. That's amazing. Congrats. Thanks, Zora said, though her voice wasn't as cheerful as usual. But it's in Chicago. Jisoo's smile faded as she understood. Ah. I see, and Min-joon, Zora nodded, the full weight of the decision pressing down on her. Yeah, I don't know what to do. The rest of the day was filled with meetings and project updates, but Zora's mind kept wandering back to the email. By the time she left work, the sun was setting, turning the Seoul skyline shades of orange and pink. Without even thinking about it, her feet led her to Min-joon's language school. She found him in his classroom, cleaning up after his last lesson of the day. Seeing him so at ease made her heart ache. How could she even think about leaving this behind? Zora. Min-joon smiled when he saw her, but his smile faded when he noticed her worried expression. What's wrong? Zora sat down at one of the student desks, feeling suddenly tired. I got offered a promotion today, she said, watching his face closely. It's an amazing chance, but it's in Chicago. Min-joon's face showed different emotions, pride, understanding, and then a hint of fear. He sat next to her and held her hand. Wow, that's incredible, he said softly. It's what you've been working for, isn't it? Zora nodded, tears filling her eyes. It is. But Min-joon, I don't know if I want to leave. Seoul, my life here. You. Min-joon stayed quiet for a moment, his thumb gently rubbing the back of her hand. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but firm. Zora, I would never ask you to give up your dreams for me. Your career is important. But what about us? Zora whispered, barely able to get the words out. Min-joon squeezed her hand tighter. We'll figure it out. Maybe. Maybe I could look for teaching jobs in Chicago. His words hung in the air, filled with hope but also doubt. Zora knew how much Seoul meant to him, how important his family and culture were. Asking him to move felt selfish. Let's not make any decisions right now, Min-joon said, pulling her into a comforting hug. We have time to think about it, right? Zora nodded against his chest, breathing in the familiar smell of his cologne and green tea. Yeah, I have a week to decide. As they walked through the streets of Seoul, hand in hand, everything felt different to Zora. Every street sign, every smell of food, every person they passed felt important, as if she was seeing it all for the last time. They ended up at their favorite food tent, tucked away in a quiet alley. The friendly lady running it greeted them with a warm smile, already getting out the soju and small dishes of side dishes. As they sat on the small stools, Zora could feel the heavy silence between them. Min-joon poured her a glass of soju, his hands moving slowly. "Remember the first time we came here?" he asked with a small smile. "You couldn't handle the soju at all." Zora laughed, warmth spreading through her chest at the memory. "I've come a long way since then, haven't I?" Min-joon's eyes softened. "You have, in so many ways." They started talking about the past few months, their first awkward language exchange, exploring Seoul together, how their relationship grew. Each memory made it harder for Zora to imagine leaving. As the night went on, they talked more deeply. Min-joon shared his dream of opening his own language school someday, and Zora talked about wanting to make a big difference in the tech world. "You know," Min-joon said, his words slurred from the alcohol, "I've always admired how driven you are. Your passion for your work, it's one of the things I love most about you." Zora felt her throat tighten. "I love how passionate you are too, the way you light up when you teach, when you talk about your culture. I don't want to take that from you." Min-joon gently cupped her face. "Zora, listen to me. No matter what decision you make, we'll face it together. If you stay, I'll support you. If you go, we'll find a way. I believe in us." The sincerity in his eyes made Zora's heart swell. But even as she leaned into his touch, a small voice in her mind asked, can her love really survive a long-distance relationship? Could Min-joon be happy away from Seoul? As they left the food tent and walked into the warm night air, the reality of their situation hit Zora again. The busy streets of Seoul, once so unfamiliar, now felt like home. Soon it could all be just a memory. They stopped on a bridge overlooking the Han River, the city lights shimmering on the water. Min-joon pulled Zora close, wrapping his arms around her. "Whatever happens," he whispered into her hair, "you've changed my life, Zora Williams. You've shown me a new world, right here in Seoul." Zora held him tighter, trying to remember every detail of this moment. His heartbeat, the hum of traffic, the faint smell of cherry blossoms in the air. "You've changed my life too," she whispered. "I never expected to find this, a home." They stood there for a long time, holding each other, the weight of the decision heavy in the air. When they finally left, Zora knew that whatever she chose, something important would be lost. Back in her apartment, Zora couldn't sleep. She stood on her small balcony, looking out at the Seoul skyline. The city that once felt overwhelming now felt like a friend. She thought of Chicago, her family, her old friends, the comfort of her hometown. Then she thought of all she had gained in Seoul, new friends, professional growth, and most of all, Min-joon. Her phone buzzed with a message from Min-joon. "Good night, Zora, see you in the morning. I love you." Zora felt tears in her eyes as she typed her reply. "I love you too, Min-joon. We'll stay together no matter what happens." As she crawled into bed, her mind raced with thoughts. The excitement of the promotion fought with the sadness of leaving her new life behind. She fell asleep, her dreams filled with images of tall buildings, peaceful Hanok villages, Lake Michigan, and the Han River. The next morning, Zora woke up knowing she had a big decision to make, one that would shape not just her job, but her whole future. As she got ready for work, she prepared herself for the tough talks ahead. No matter what she chose, she knew it would come with both gains and losses. Stepping into the busy Seoul morning, the city buzzing with life, Zora took a deep breath. The path ahead wasn't clear, but one thing was certain: she had changed, and there was no going back to the person she was before she came to Seoul. Whatever happened, a part of her would always belong to this city and to the love she found here. Chapter 8: Reflections and Realizations. The usual busy energy of Technova's office felt far away to Zora as she stared at her computer screen. Her mind wasn't on the project proposal in front of her. It had been 2 weeks since her argument with Min-joon, and in that time she had thrown herself into her work. Her dedication impressed her co-workers, but it also made some of them worrying. Zora see Jisoo's gentle voice interrupted her thoughts. We're going out for lunch. Want to join us? Zora looked up and forced a smile. Thanks, but I need to finish this proposal. Maybe next time. Jisoo frowned with concern but nodded and left her alone. As the office emptied, Zora leaned back in her chair and gazed out the window. The Seoul skyline, which used to make her feel excited, now seemed distant and cold. Her phone buzzed and, for a moment, her heart skipped, but it was just another work email. Min-joon hadn't reached out since their fight, and Zora's pride kept her from texting him first. She still felt the sting of their last words. You don't understand the pressure I'm under, Min-joon had said, his usual calm breaking. My family, my culture, it's not as easy as just following your heart. And you think it's easy for me, Zora had snapped back. I left everything behind to come here. I'm the one who's always trying to fit in, trying to understand. The argument had gotten worse, bringing out fears and misunderstandings they'd both been avoiding. When Min-joon stormed out of her apartment, Zora was too hurt to stop him. Now, as she stared at her work emails, Zora wondered if she had been too quick to judge, too focused on her own side to see Min-joon's. The promotion offer still hung over her, a reminder that time was running out. A knock on her office door snapped her out of her thoughts. Mrs. Kim, her team leader, stood in the doorway, her face unusually soft. Zora see, do you have a moment? Zora nodded, sitting up straighter as Mrs. Kim took a seat. Your work has been great these past weeks, Mrs. Kim began, but I can't help but notice something seems off. Is everything all right? Zora was surprised by the concern in Mrs. Kim's voice. She had always seen her boss as strict and serious. This moment of kindness nearly broke the wall Zora had built around herself. I'm fine, Zora started to say, but the words felt empty. She took a deep breath and decided to be honest. Actually, I'm struggling with some personal stuff. Cultural differences, relationship problems. To Zora's surprise, Mrs. Kim's face softened even more. Ah, I understand. Balancing two worlds isn't easy. Zora shook her head, feeling a lump in her throat. No, it's not. I thought I was doing well, but now ... Mrs. Kim leaned in, her voice gentle. When I first started working with international teams, I made a lot of mistakes. I thought I understood Western culture from movies, but the real thing, it was much harder. Zora listened, surprised by her boss's openness. But you know what I learned, Mrs. Kim continued. The key isn't just understanding the other culture. It's being willing to admit when you don't understand and keep trying, even when it's hard. Those words hit Zora deeply. She had been so focused on trying to prove herself that she had forgotten the importance of being open and honest. Thank you, Mrs. Kim, Zora said quietly. I think I needed to hear that. As Mrs. Kim left, Zora felt a new sense of determination. She'd been so focused on fitting in and succeeding that she had lost sight of the real connections that mattered. The rest of the workday passed quickly, Zora's mind filled with thoughts of Min-joon and the future she was starting to picture in Seoul. As she packed up her things, she made a decision. It was time to fight for what she wanted. Zora nodded, sitting up straighter as Mrs. Kim took a seat. Across the city, Min-joon sat alone in his classroom, staring at the whiteboard. The quiet, which usually made him feel calm, now felt heavy and sad. His last class had ended an hour ago, but he couldn't bring himself to go home. A knock at the door brought him back to reality. His younger sister, Soo-min, peeked in. Appa, are you planning to stay here forever? She joked, though her eyes showed she was worried. Min-joon gave a small smile, just thinking. Soo-min walked in and sat on a desk, thinking about Zora. The mention of her name made Min-joon's chest tighten. He nodded. You know, Soo-min said, carefully, I talked with Mom and Dad about her. Min-joon looked at his sister in surprise. You did? Soo-min nodded. They're trying to understand. It's not easy for them, but I think they're starting to see how much she means to you. Min-joon felt a weight lifting off him. Really? Yeah. Mom even asked if Zora might want to learn how to make kimchi. The image of Zora in his mother's kitchen made Min-joon smile, but it also made him realize how much he had messed up. He had let his fears drive them apart. "I've made a huge mistake, Soo-min," he said softly. His sister squeezed his hand. "Then fix it, Appa. It's not too late." After Soo-min left, Min-joon looked at his phone, Zora's contact shining on the screen. His thumb hovered over the call button, but he hesitated. A simple call didn't feel enough for everything they had been through. At the same time, Zora was walking through the busy streets of Hongdae, a part of Seoul full of energy and life. Street performers played music, and the smell of food filled the air. It was the kind of place she and Min-joon would explore together. Her feet led her to a small bookstore Min-joon had shown her, the one he called his secret garden of words. The elderly owner smiled as Zora walked in. "Welcome," the owner said kindly. "Are you alone?" The owner's kindness almost made Zora cry. She nodded, unable to speak. The woman handed her a small book. "It's a book of Korean love poems," she said. "Love can overcome language barriers." Zora held the book close. "Thank you," she whispered. As she left the store, Zora felt stronger. She had come to Seoul looking for adventure, but she had found so much more. Min-joon wasn't just a boyfriend, he was her partner in navigating their two different worlds. She couldn't let fear stop her from trying. Back at her apartment, Zora opened her laptop to the email where she had started declining the Chicago promotion. As she read it, she realized Seoul had become more than just a stop in her career, it had become her home. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Jisoo. "Zora, we miss your smile, don't give up. You've come too far to turn back now." The message gave Zora the last bit of courage she needed. She picked up her phone to call Min-joon, but before she could, a new message came in from Min-joon. "Zora, I think we need to meet. Can you come to Namsan Tower tomorrow morning?" Zora's heart raced as she typed back. "Yes, let's meet there. We have a lot to talk about." As she put down her phone, Zora felt a mix of nerves and hope. Tomorrow could be a fresh start. Whatever happened, she knew she was ready to face it. That night, as the city buzzed around her, Zora felt a sense of peace. Seoul had changed her, and she was ready to see what the future held. Chapter 9. Bridging the Gap. The cool morning air gently brushed Zora's face as she walked toward Namsan Tower. The familiar tower stood tall against the clear blue sky, a symbol of her memories with Min-joon. She remembered their first visit with the amazing view of Seoul, the nervous excitement of their new relationship, and the hope for future adventures together. Zora saw Min-joon before he noticed her. He stood by the entrance, his posture stiff, hands deep in his pockets. Her heart beat faster at the sight of him, a mix of excitement and lingering hurt swirling inside her. "Min-joon, she called softly. He turned toward her, his eyes lighting up with relief and, maybe, a hint of hope. "Zora," he said quietly, taking a step closer but stopping himself. "Thank you for coming." They stood there awkwardly for a moment, the weight of their separation thick in the air. Finally, Min-joon motioned toward the tower. "Shall we?" As they rode the elevator up, the silence between them stretched. Zora glanced at Min-joon, noticing the dark circles under his eyes and the way his usually neat appearance seemed a little off. He looked as tired as she felt. At the observation deck, they found a quiet corner, away from the few morning visitors. The view of Seoul spread out below them, bathed in the soft light of dawn. It was here, months ago, that they had shared their first kiss. The memory lingered in the air, sweet but tinged with sadness. Min-joon turned to her, his expression a mix of strength and vulnerability. "Zora, I need to apologize." Zora's heart skipped a beat. "Min-joon." He gently raised his hand, stopping her. "Please, let me say this. I've thought a lot these past 2 weeks. About us, the difficulties we face, and the future I want. I was scared. Scared of disappointing my family, of stepping away from tradition, of the unknown. But more than anything, I realized I'm most scared of losing you." Zora felt her eyes sting with tears. "I'm sorry too," she said softly. "I didn't understand the pressure you were under. I was so focused on my own challenges that I didn't see how hard it was for you as well." Min-joon slowly took her hand, his touch warm and familiar. "We both have a lot to learn," he said. "About each other's cultures, about communication, and about making compromises. But Zora, I want to learn with you." As the sun rose higher, casting a golden glow over the city, they talked. Really talked in a way they hadn't before. Min-joon spoke about the expectations of his family, his struggle between his love for her and his sense of duty. Zora shared her feelings of loneliness and frustration with constantly being the outsider. "I had a long conversation with my parents," Min-joon admitted, his voice calm but determined. "I told them how much you mean to me, how you've enriched my life. It wasn't easy, but they're willing to try, Zora, to get to know you, to understand us." Zora felt a weight lift off her chest. "Really, that's amazing, Min-joon," he smiled softly. "My sister, Su-min, helped a lot. She's been speaking on our behalf, and my mom asked if you'd like to learn how to make kimchi." The thought of being in Min-joon's family kitchen, learning to make kimchi with his mother, filled Zora with warmth. It was more than just a cooking lesson, it was an invitation into their world, a sign of acceptance. As the morning went on, Zora found herself relaxing. There was still much to figure out, but knowing they would face the challenges together gave her hope. "I have something to tell you," Zora said, her heart pounding. "I've made a decision about the promotion." Min-joon's hand gently squeezed hers, but his face remained calm and supportive. "Whatever you've decided, Zora, I'll be with you." Zora took a deep breath. "I'm staying in Seoul. I've realized that what I've built here, my life, my experiences, my relationship with you is too valuable to leave. I want to see where this journey takes us." Min-joon's face lit up with pure joy. He pulled her into a tight hug. "Thank you so much, Zora," he whispered into her hair. As they parted, his expression became serious again. "I want you to know, Zora, I'm committed to making this work. To bridging the gap between our cultures, to facing whatever comes our way, together." Zora nodded, her heart full of love for the man standing before her. "Together," she agreed. They spent the rest of the morning walking hand in hand around Namsan Tower, reconnecting and talking about their future. They discussed practical things, like how to handle family gatherings, ways to avoid cultural misunderstandings at work, and how they could keep learning about each other's backgrounds. As they returned to the busy streets of Seoul, Zora felt a renewed sense of purpose. The city that had once seemed so foreign now felt like home, filled with endless possibilities. "I have to get to work," Zora said reluctantly as they reached the subway. Min-joon nodded, but his eyes held a glimmer of excitement. "Actually, I was hoping I could walk you to your office." "There's something I want to do." "Curious," Zora agreed. As they neared the Technova building, she noticed a shift in Min-joon's demeanor. He stood taller, a look of determination in his eyes. "Min-joon, what are you up to?" He took her hands in his voice serious. "Zora, I want your co-workers to know how important you are to me, how serious I am about us. Will you let me speak to them?" Zora felt a mix of nervousness and excitement. "Are you sure you don't have to do this?" Min-joon nodded, his face set with resolve. "I'm sure. It's time I stepped out of my comfort zone, just like you've been doing since you arrived in Seoul." When they entered the office, Zora could feel the curious looks from her colleagues. She led Min-joon to her team, who were gathered for their morning meeting. "Excuse me," Min-joon said, his voice firm but calm. The room went silent as everyone turned to look at him. Zora felt her heart swell with pride as Min-joon began speaking in carefully practiced English. "Good morning, everyone. I'm Min-joon Park, Zora's boyfriend." The word sounded new to him, but he continued. "I wanted to come here today to tell you how much Zora means to me and how thankful I am for the support you've given her." The room stayed quiet, with everyone focused on Min-joon. Zora has taught me a lot about courage, about new experiences, and about seeing my own culture differently. She's faced many challenges since coming to Seoul, but she's done so with strength and grace. I know cultural differences can sometimes lead to misunderstandings, but I want you all to know that I am here to help Zora navigate these challenges. I will be the bridge between our worlds. Min-joon looked at Zora, his eyes full of love. Zora has chosen to make Seoul her home, and I promise to make sure she feels welcome, respected, and loved. Not just by me, but by my family and by this city. There was a pause before the room erupted in applause. Zora's co-workers came forward, offering congratulations and warm words. Mrs. Kim even approached with a rare smile. Zora see, Min-joon see, congratulations. This is a great example of building cultural bridges. I look forward to seeing how your relationship strengthens our team's cross-cultural work. As the excitement faded and everyone returned to their tasks, Zora turned to Min-joon, her eyes wet with emotion. "Thank you," she whispered, hugging him tightly. "That was amazing." Min-joon held her close, his voice soft. "No, thank you, Zora, for showing me that love can rise above cultural differences and that it's worth fighting for." As they said their goodbyes and promised to meet for dinner, Zora felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. The road ahead wouldn't be without its challenges. There would be more misunderstandings, more family issues, more moments of doubt. But she knew now, without a doubt, that she and Min-joon would face them together. Walking to her desk, Zora caught a glimpse of her reflection in a window. The woman staring back wasn't the same one who had arrived in Seoul feeling lost and unsure. This Zora stood tall, confident, ready to embrace the complexities of her life. As she began her workday, the mix of Korean and English conversations flowed around her. Zora smiled. She had come to Seoul looking for adventure and career growth, but she had found so much more: a home, a love, and a future full of promise. Chapter 10: A Seoul Love Story. The cool autumn air smelled of roasting chestnuts as Zora and Min-joon walked through Insadong, holding hands. Insadong, with its traditional arts and crafts, was busy with tourists and locals looking at colorful clothes and small tea shops. "I can't believe it's almost been a year since I came to Seoul," Zora said, looking at the familiar streets with new appreciation. Min-joon smiled and squeezed her hand gently. "A lot has changed since then. You've become a trousseau light, Zora." They stopped in front of a small art gallery. Inside, Zora saw a beautiful painting that mixed Western abstract art with Korean calligraphy. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's like us, different but together." Min-joon smiled, understanding. Two styles blending to create something unique and beautiful. As they continued walking, Zora thought about their journey. The early struggles, cultural differences, and moments of doubt had only brought them closer and made their relationship stronger. Min-joon's phone buzzed, interrupting their peaceful walk. He checked it, looking both excited and nervous. "It's my mom," he said, sounding tense. "She wants to know if we're still coming to dinner tonight." Zora felt a small knot of worrying in her stomach. Even though things were better since Min-joon's big speech at her office, family dinners were still stressful. But they had promised to face these challenges together. "Of course we are," Zora replied confidently. "I've been practicing my kimchi-making skills all week." Min-joon looked at her with affection. "You're amazing. My mom will be impressed." As they headed to Min-joon's family home, Zora practiced the Korean greetings she had learned. She remembered her first dinner with his family, which didn't go well, but that felt so long ago now. Min-joon's mother opened the door. Her polite expression had softened a bit. Zora noticed the small difference: a gentler smile, a warmer look. "Hello, Mother," Zora said in Korean, bowing deeply. "I brought this for you." She gave her a beautifully wrapped box of premium green tea from Jeju Island, knowing that Min-joon's mother loved it. Min-joon's mother looked surprised but pleased. "Thank you, Zora," she replied warmly. Inside, Zora noticed more small changes. A photo of her and Min-joon at Namsan Tower was now on the shelf with the other family pictures. The atmosphere felt more relaxed than before. Min-joon's father entered the room, giving Zora a nod. "Zora, I hear you're doing well at your company," he said in careful English. Zora sat up straighter, feeling proud. "Yes, I just led a cross-cultural training program for our international teams, and it went really well." At the dinner table, the conversation flowed easily. Zora shared stories about her work, speaking in improved Korean, which allowed her to communicate better. Min-joon's parents listened carefully and asked more questions about her life and experiences. When it was time to prepare the side dishes, Min-joon's mother invited Zora to the kitchen. "Let's see how your kimchi making has improved," she said with a smile. As they worked side by side, Zora felt a connection growing between them. She moved with more confidence, mixing the spices and preparing the cabbage under Min-joon's mother's watchful eye. "You've learned well," Min-joon's mother said softly. "It's not easy to adapt to a new culture, but you've done it with grace." Zora felt touched by the praise. "Thank you," she said, her voice full of emotion. "It means a lot to hear that." As they sat down to eat, Zora exchanged a glance with Min-joon. The pride in his eyes made her heart swell with happiness. The dinner went smoothly, with warmth that wasn't there before. Min-joon's sister, Soo-min, kept the mood light by sharing stories from her university life, making Zora feel even more accepted. Near the end of the evening, Min-joon's father cleared his throat. "Zora," he said seriously, "when Min-joon first told us about you, we had doubts. But seeing how happy you make him and how hard you've worked to understand our culture, we're glad you're part of our family." Zora felt Min-joon's hand squeeze hers under the table. She was overwhelmed with emotion. "Thank you," Zora said, her voice thick. "That means everything to us." When it was time to leave, the usual formal goodbyes were replaced with warm hugs and promises to meet again soon. As they stepped into the cool night air, Zora felt a weight lift from her shoulders. "That went well," Min-joon said, relief clear in his voice. Zora nodded and leaned into him. "It really did. I think we're finally bridging the gap." The next week, Zora stood in front of a group of executives at Technova, presenting the results of her cross-cultural training program. As she spoke, weaving together stories and data, she saw her words making an impact. Ms. Williams, the CEO, said after she finished, "This is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need. Your unique experiences have brought great value to our company." As the room applauded, Zora caught Mrs. Kim's eye. Her team leader gave her a small nod, full of pride. Later, Mrs. Kim came over to Zora's desk. "Zora, you've come so far since you arrived in Seoul. It's been amazing to see your growth, both at work and personally." Zora smiled, grateful for her mentor. "Thank you, Mrs. Kim. I couldn't have done it without your guidance." That evening, Zora and Min-joon met at their favorite Poyang matcha, a small street food tent where they had shared many important talks. As they sat down, the friendly owner greeted them with a smile, recognizing them as regulars. "I've been thinking about the future," Min-joon said as he poured them each a drink. Zora's heart skipped a beat. "What kind of thoughts?" "I want to open my own language school," Min-joon said, looking serious but excited. "Not just to teach Korean, but to help foreigners understand our culture and ... I want you to be part of it." Zora's eyes lit up. "That's a great idea. Maybe we could add cross-cultural business training too." As they shared their ideas, Zora felt amazed at how far they had come. What began as a simple language exchange had turned into something so much more, a partnership that blended cultures, careers, and dreams. The next day, they visited Namsan Tower again, the place where their relationship had started. The autumn leaves were bright red and gold, matching the warmth of the memories they were revisiting. As they looked out over the city, Zora felt a deep sense of belonging. This city, which once felt foreign, was now her home. And Min-joon, the language teacher who had opened up this new world to her, was now her family. When I first came to Seoul, I thought it was just for my career, Zora said, turning to Min-joon. I never imagined I'd find this, us. Double quotes. Min-joon pulled her close. And I never thought teaching English would lead me to the love of my life. Our love story is just beginning, Zora. As they kissed the beautiful Seoul skyline before them, Zora knew their journey wasn't over. There would be more challenges, more bridges to build between their cultures. But with Min-joon by her side, she was ready for it all. As the sun set, casting the sky in pink and orange, Zora and Min-joon stood hand in hand. In that moment, surrounded by the beauty of Seoul and the strength of their love, Zora knew she had found her place in the world. Their story, like the city, was a mix of tradition and modern life, of struggles and dreams. As they left the tower and walked back into the heart of Seoul, Zora and Min-joon were no longer just two people in a cross-cultural romance. They were partners, ready to write the next chapter of their love story together. The end. Thank you for watching.